June 14, 1944. Normandy. The rain had stopped, but the mud still clung to boots and steel alike. In a narrow hedgerow lane near Villers-Bocage, an American anti-tank crew crouched behind their 57mm gun, its barrel streaked with soot and fear. They had been waiting for hours. No movement, only the distant growl of engines. Then, through the mist, shadows emerged, 4 panzers crawling forward like metal beasts, their turrets scanning the road. The gunner, Sergeant Thomas Hale, whispered one line to his loader. 3 seconds, the crew understood. Every shot would be timed. 3 seconds between each, no panic, no hesitation. In that rhythm, they found control. The first shell left the barrel, a flash, a roar, a strike. 3 seconds later, another, then another. Within 12 seconds, the lane was filled with smoke, fire, and silence. Hale didn't cheer. He simply adjusted the gun's sights again, waiting for movement. Because in war, survival often came down to what a man could do in 3 seconds. By the summer of 1944, the Allied armies had broken through the beaches of Normandy, but liberation was far from won. What awaited them inland was a maze of hedgerows, thick earthen walls, centuries old, dividing every field and lane. Each hedge was a fortress, each road a potential ambush. The Allies had stormed ashore with overwhelming firepower. But once inside the Bocage country, their tanks and vehicles became trapped in narrow corridors where visibility was measured in meters, not miles. The Germans knew this terrain better than anyone. Panzer units, especially those of the elite Panzer Lehr Division and 2nd SS Panzer Corps, adapted quickly. They set up camouflaged ambushes at every bend, using their Panzer IVs and the fearsome Panther tanks as mobile artillery. Their orders were simple: halt the Allied advance by any means, bleed them in the hedgerows, and force them back, toward the sea. For Allied infantry, the enemy's armor had become a nightmare. A single panzer could hold an entire company at bay. Anti-tank weapons, though technically capable of piercing German armor, demanded nerve and precision. Crews had to expose themselves, remain steady under return fire, and coordinate perfectly with loaders and spotters, all while knowing that one miscalculation meant annihilation. The U.S. Army's 57mm M1 anti-tank gun, derived from the British 6-pounder, was reliable but limited. It could penetrate the side armor of a Panzer IV or the rear of a Panther, but only at specific ranges and angles. Head-on engagements were nearly suicidal. That reality forced Allied gunners to rethink everything, from how they positioned their guns to how they timed their shots. Success wasn't just about firepower, it was about rhythm, discipline, and understanding how a tank commander reacted under pressure. Sergeant Thomas Hale's crew, part of the 30th Infantry Division, had learned that the hard way. In the early days after D-Day, their first encounters with German armor had been disastrous. They had fired too soon, revealing their position. They had fired too slowly, allowing tanks to swing their turrets and obliterate them. It was a brutal education. Hale began to notice something, a pattern in German response time. The first second was confusion. The second was reaction. The third was return fire. It was in those fleeting 3 seconds that life and death were decided. Behind the front lines, the Allied command was also struggling with these realities. Reports from Normandy described tank duels at ranges of less than 100 yards, essentially point-blank combat. Crews described the panic, the deafening thunder, and the terrifying speed at which an engagement unfolded. Military analysts began documenting firing intervals, aiming speeds, and turret rotation times. Numbers were being studied like never before, but in the field, Hale and men like him didn't need a study. They learned through survival. For anti-tank crews, there was no room for error. A missed shot meant a tank's machine gun finding your position. A delay in reloading meant the end. Crews had to operate as one organism, each movement timed, each shout perfectly measured. Hale's 3-second rule wasn't a theory born from books. It was forged in the mud and chaos of Normandy. It was a rhythm designed to outpace the enemy's brain. The front was filled with countless unsung units like Hale's. They had no armor, no heavy guns, only grit, calculation, and courage. They were the thin, invisible line between the German panzers and the infantry behind them. The 50-centimeter gun might not have been the most powerful weapon on the battlefield, but in the right hands, under the right timing, could turn into something divine, stating, "The days in June 1944 were long, humid, and tense. Every dawn brought the sound of distant engines. Every dusk carried the echoes of artillery. Hale's unit, dug into the damp hedgerow lanes near Caumont, had spent 2 days perfecting their angles, calculating distances, and rehearsing reload sequences. 3 seconds between each shot, no more, no less. That simple rule became their anchor against chaos. And when the sound of German tanks finally echoed down the lane on June 14th, Hale wasn't thinking about tactics or bravery or history. He was thinking only of that rhythm. 3 seconds, the invisible heartbeat of survival. It was in that narrow, muddy corridor of Normandy that one crew would prove how discipline could overcome armor, and how a single rhythm could alter the fate of an entire platoon. The 30th Infantry Division, known as the Old Hickory Division, had landed at Omaha Beach in the second wave of the Normandy invasion. By mid-June 1944, they were advancing through the treacherous bocage country south of Isigny. Progress was measured not in miles, but in hedgerows. Each was a wall of earth, roots, and tangled brush that limited visibility and blocked vehicles. Movement was slow, dangerous, and deafeningly close. Anti-tank crews often worked in isolation. 1 gun, 6 men, and a prayer. The Germans had mastered ambush tactics, sending their panzers forward just long enough to draw Allied fire before striking from hidden positions. For a gun crew, survival meant hitting first, hitting fast, and relocating before the enemy could lock on. Sergeant Thomas Hale, a 27-year-old from Pennsylvania, commanded one of these 57mm guns. He was quiet, methodical, and obsessed with timing. In training, he had been known for drilling his crew relentlessly, insisting that every movement, from ramming the shell to closing the breach, be done in rhythm. "Speed is safety," he used to say, though the phrase would soon take on new meaning. Hale's moment of clarity came after a disastrous encounter near St. Lo. His crew had fired the first shot at a Panzer IV from less than 150 yards. The shell struck but didn't penetrate. The loader hesitated for a second, just 1 second, before reloading. In that instant, the German gunner turned, fired, and obliterated their neighboring gun crew. The timing burned into Hale's mind. 3 seconds had made the difference between death and survival. Back at camp that night, Hale sat in silence, sketching on a ration box. He timed out the sequence in his head: the moment of impact, the tank's delay before reacting, the angle change, and the second shot. The pattern was always the same. After every hit, a German tank took roughly 3 seconds to respond, to adjust its turret, to locate the source of fire, or to react to the impact. From that moment, he imposed a new rule on his crew: 3 seconds between each shot. The loader, the aimer, the gunner, all had to move in perfect sync. It wasn't about rushing, it was about rhythm. 3 seconds meant the enemy never recovered their balance. 3 seconds meant Hale's gun always fired before the German could return fire. Word of Hale's precision spread quietly through nearby platoons. Crews began experimenting with timing, synchronizing their reloads with German reaction cycles. Some called it luck, others called it madness, but commanders noticed the results. Hale's gun had knocked out 4 tanks in 2 engagements without suffering a single casualty. In a battlefield where anti-tank crews rarely survived a week, that record bordered on miraculous. Meanwhile, the German tank crews were not idle. The panzer divisions fighting in Normandy were among Hitler's most experienced, veterans from the Eastern Front. Their tactics were aggressive, their coordination tight. They often attacked in platoons of 4 or 5, using overlapping arcs of fire to overwhelm anti-tank positions. Their confidence came from armor and firepower. Against Shermans or Cromwells, they had little to fear. Against hidden guns, however, they learned a harsh truth. One precise crew could decimate an entire formation. The battlefield of June 1944 was a brutal test of human endurance and machine limits. Communication lines were fragile. Smoke, rain, and confusion clouded every order. For most gunners, combat dissolved into panic. But Hale's 3-second rule provided something rare: clarity. It stripped chaos down to mathematics, a controlled rhythm in the middle of hell. Over the following days, Hale refined the rule. He learned to time not just his shots, but the crew's breathing. The loader inhaled as the shell slid into the breech. The aimer exhaled as he called the next target. Hale squeezed the trigger on the beat of 3. It was almost mechanical, yet deeply human. Every man knew his life depended on that rhythm. By the time the crew reached Villers-Bocage, the rhythm had become instinct. The gun was positioned in a narrow farm lane concealed behind a collapsed wall, its barrel aligned with a bend in the road. The fields ahead were quiet, but reconnaissance reports warned of German armor regrouping nearby. Hale adjusted his sight and gave one calm order: wait for movement. For 2 hours, nothing happened. Then, as twilight deepened, the ground began to tremble. The sound of gears and steel rolled through the mist. 4 panzers, moving in formation, advanced toward the lane. The crew didn't flinch. Hale's hand hovered near the trigger. The loader waited with the next shell ready. Hale whispered again, 3 seconds. In the next few minutes, that rule would turn a small anti-tank crew into one of the most lethal in the Normandy campaign. At its core, the 3-second rule was not about weapons, it was about men. In every anti-tank crew, survival depended on coordination tighter than any machine. 6 men worked as one heartbeat: the commander, gunner, loader, spotters, and 2 ammunition handlers. Each had seconds to react, each movement rehearsed until instinct replaced thought. Under Hale's method, that unity became absolute. In most engagements, fear ruled first contact. The sound of a tank, the grinding treads, the metallic echo, carried long before it appeared. Men's hands would sweat, voices shake, timing slip. The natural human response was chaos. Hale's rhythm changed that. 3 seconds between shots meant every man's fear had a framework. It turned panic into pattern. It was something to hold on to when everything else dissolved in noise and fire. The tactical side was brutally simple. A 57mm gun could not win a duel by strength. It had to win by speed and accuracy. German panzers, especially the Panther and Tiger, could survive multiple glancing hits. But Hale's focus was not on penetration alone, it was on disruption. The first shot was meant to shock, to blind the enemy crew with smoke and concussion. The second, fired before the enemy reacted, sought the weak points, side armor, lower hull, or exposed fuel tanks. The third sealed the result, ensuring no return fire. In those 3 intervals, the crew's discipline determined everything. The loader's arms blurred as he rammed another shell, sweat and cordite stinging his eyes. The gunner realigned by instinct, correcting for recoil and distance. Hale counted silently, a metronome inside the chaos. 1, 2, fire. Each shot wasn't just an attack. It was a heartbeat in a sequence of survival. What few outsiders understood was the psychological war between gunners and tankers. Both sides hunted each other through hedgerows and ruins, both hearing before seeing. The tankers relied on armor, visibility, and the power of their main gun. The gunners relied on invisibility, cover, and silence. When Hale's first shell hit a panzer, it wasn't only metal that cracked, it was confidence. Tank commanders knew they had a few seconds to locate the gun before the next shot arrived. Hale's 3-second rule exploited that fear perfectly. The German crew, trapped inside steel, disoriented by dust and impact, rarely reacted fast enough. To his men, Hale's approach bordered on obsession. He spoke little in camp, but every exercise revolved around timing. 3 seconds, not 4, not 2, he would say quietly. The men laughed at first, but after their first successful ambush, the laughter stopped. They began to count with him, silently, automatically, as though time itself had joined their crew. The rule became ritual. Military historians later noted that many Allied gunners began unconsciously developing similar firing rhythms. Under extreme stress, the human brain sought order. Hale's innovation simply formalized what others did instinctively: find rhythm in destruction. It wasn't science, it was survival logic. On the tactical level, his method revealed how much of warfare depended not on weapons, but on human synchronization. The U.S. Army's manuals emphasized range tables and ballistic charts, but on the field, none of that mattered if men couldn't act in unison. Hale's 3-second rule simplified decision-making to its most vital element: timing. By removing hesitation, he reduced vulnerability. A crew that fired on rhythm became nearly unstoppable against an unprepared enemy. In Normandy's hedgerows, where every battle was fought at close range, this rule became even deadlier. Visibility was limited to 50 or 100 meters. Tanks often appeared suddenly, without warning, emerging from gaps in the brush. Hale's gun was usually hidden behind foliage or the ruins of a farmhouse, muzzle just above ground level. When the target appeared, there was no time for calculation, only execution. The rhythm guided them through that storm. But the human toll was immense. Each man carried the pressure of perfection. The loader's hands blistered and bled from constant friction. The gunner's ears rang for days after combat. Sleep was brief, haunted by the echo of their own firing sequence. Yet despite exhaustion, morale within Hale's crew remained unbroken. They trusted the rhythm because it had saved them. Every survivor of those weeks described one feeling above all others: focus. A kind of mechanical calm that blocked out everything except the next 3 seconds. Hale himself remained distant from praise. When a correspondent later asked about his method, he simply said, "It wasn't a rule. It was just the only way we stayed alive." That humility reflected the reality of most frontline tactics: innovations born not from theory, but from desperation. Behind the front, intelligence officers began noting similar firing intervals across multiple anti-tank units. They realized that rapid, rhythmic volleys overwhelmed German armor psychologically. Crews under repeated impact often misjudged direction, assuming multiple guns were firing. This confusion forced them to retreat or reposition, buying precious minutes for advancing infantry. The 3-second rule, though never officially recorded in doctrine, symbolized a new kind of battlefield logic, where precision replaced panic and discipline became a weapon. It also revealed something deeper about warfare itself, that the difference between chaos and control could be measured not in miles or minutes, but in heartbeats. For Hale's crew, that understanding was everything. They didn't see themselves as heroes or tacticians. They were survivors operating in a mechanical symphony of timing and trust. Each man's role existed only within the next 3 seconds, nothing before, nothing after. And on June 14th, when the 1st Panzer rolled into view at Villers-Bocage, that invisible rhythm pulsed through them again, one heartbeat shared by 6 men facing the strongest machines Germany had ever built. The 50mm M1 anti-tank gun was, by design, modest. It was light, mobile, and intended to be manned by small crews capable of rapid deployment. Its firepower was limited compared to the German 75mm guns and the larger Panther and Tiger turrets. Yet, in the hands of Sergeant Thomas Hale, the gun's shortcomings became secondary to the crew's precision. Technology alone did not win battles. It was the combination of mechanical reliability and human timing that transformed this small cannon into a decisive weapon. The gun's limitations forced innovation. Penetration tables dictated range, angle, and target zone. A frontal hit on a Panther was nearly useless at typical hedgerow distances. Hale trained his crew to exploit side and rear angles, to anticipate turret rotations, and to calculate the exact moment a shell would strike while the enemy crew was still adjusting. Every technical specification, the barrel length, muzzle velocity, shell weight, became a tool subordinated to the rhythm of 3 seconds, what technology provided in data, human discipline amplified in execution. German armor had evolved to dominate the battlefield, but it was not perfect. Panzer IVs had slow turret traverse, especially when traversing uneven hedgerow terrain. Panthers had impressive frontal armor, but vulnerabilities along lower glacis plates and sides. Tiger IIs were formidable, yet their weight and fuel consumption limited rapid maneuvering. Hale's approach was built around exploiting these mechanical realities, the enemy's reaction time, turret lag, and restricted sight lines. He turned their strengths into weaknesses by forcing them to react faster than they could. The psychological impact on enemy crews was profound. When shells struck repeatedly in timed succession, confusion set in. Tankers had been trained to respond quickly to threats, but 3 seconds was not enough for clear identification, aiming, and firing. The rhythm disrupted their perception of the battlefield, creating the illusion of multiple guns or hidden batteries. Commanders reported hesitations in the aftermath. Seconds that would have determined survival evaporated under the relentless cadence. The fear was measurable. Post-battle accounts described German crews frozen in place, waiting for shots that never came, unsure if retreating would save them or hasten their demise. For Hale's crew, the psychological aspect was equally critical. Calm under fire was not optional. It was essential. Each man had to suppress instinctual fear to maintain rhythm. The difference between 1 and 4 Panzer kills often hinged not on aim, but on control over human response. The crew's heartbeat matched the cadence of the gun, creating a feedback loop where focus reinforced survival. Repetition in drills had created a near-automatic precision, reducing cognitive load during combat. Fear was channeled, not eliminated, transformed into a tool for action. Technology and human psychology intersected in unexpected ways. The 3-second interval functioned as both tactical decision and mental stabilizer. It forced the crew to act in discrete units of time, simplifying a chaotic environment into actionable moments. Observers later noted that this interval coincidentally aligned with the average German tank reaction time during close-range hedgerow engagements, roughly 3 seconds from impact to turret realignment. Hale's rule, therefore, exploited a mechanical delay in enemy systems while simultaneously regulating human stress response. It was a rare confluence of science and instinct. Even the ammunition logistics were influenced by the rule. A 57mm shell weighed nearly 6 kilograms. Moving multiple shells rapidly without error required choreography. The loader's movements were timed to the second. Any deviation risked misfire or dropped rounds. Hale optimized placement, ensuring shells were stacked for immediate access and that the entire gun team moved in synchronization. The rhythm created efficiency. The loader never wasted motion. The gunner never hesitated. The crew functioned as a single organism. Mechanically modest, the gun became a precise instrument of lethality through disciplined repetition. The Germans quickly learned that anti-tank guns were most dangerous when they disappeared as quickly as they fired. The 3-second rule inadvertently enforced mobility. By sticking to the interval, the crew minimized exposure between shots, reducing the likelihood of counterfire from tanks, machine guns, or supporting infantry. Every second outside rhythm was a second spent vulnerable. Technology dictated limitations, but timing dictated survival. Beyond the battlefield, the rule demonstrated a broader lesson in armored warfare. The human interface with technology could outweigh raw power. German commanders had relied on tank supremacy to dictate engagements, yet a single disciplined anti-tank crew neutralized that advantage. It revealed the fragility of mechanized confidence and over-reliance. On armor, without accounting for tactical discipline in adversaries, could be fatal. Post-war analyses repeatedly cited Normandy as evidence that small, skilled crews could impose disproportionate effects against larger, technically superior forces. Hale's method became an unofficial case study for such engagements. The rule also influenced Allied anti-tank doctrine in subtle ways. While never codified as official procedure, the principle of timed, sequential firing became a teaching point in field manuals. Crews were instructed to maintain rhythm under stress, prioritize targets based on vulnerability, and coordinate all movements to minimize exposure. The 3-second interval itself was symbolic. Not a fixed requirement, but a reminder that timing could define combat outcomes. Engineers and tacticians began re-evaluating weapon deployment with human performance in mind, understanding that efficiency and coordination could surpass brute force. Perhaps most remarkable was the human endurance the method demanded. Weeks of constant alertness, drills, and real combat forged muscles and minds to operate in precise unity. Fatigue, pain, and fear were omnipresent, yet the rhythm persisted. Some men described it as almost meditative, the cadence cutting through the chaos. Others admitted that, without it, panic would have overtaken them. The interval acted as a psychological anchor, a tiny, controllable constant in a war of unpredictability. Every shell fired on that beat reinforced survival, trust, and confidence. By the time Hale's crew faced the Panzer Platoon at Villers-Bocage, the 3-second rule had become second nature. They were not improvising. They were executing a pattern, honed over days of drills, losses, observation, and reflection. Technology provided the weapon, enemy limitations provided the opportunity, and human discipline created the lethal precision that would soon unfold. In a battlefield dominated by tanks, artillery, and chaos, a single rhythm proved to be one of the deadliest tools of war, invisible, mechanical, and devastatingly effective. The interplay between human timing, mechanical limits, and psychological pressure defined every shot fired. The rule, simple in concept, became a force multiplier. 4 tanks could be destroyed in moments, enemy morale shattered, and the battlefield itself reshaped, all through seconds, measured not by the clock, but by the steady pulse of a disciplined crew. And when the Panzer Platoon finally rolled into the kill zone, the full force of this principle would be revealed. The rhythm that had been trained into muscle memory, guided by discipline and sharpened by fear, would transform a small anti-tank team into a machine of tactical perfection. June 14, 1944. Twilight had settled over the bocage. Mist clung to the fields like smoke from distant artillery, and the narrow lane leading to Villers-Bocage seemed empty, deceptive in its calm. Sergeant Thomas Hale crouched behind his 57mm gun, eyes scanning the faint outlines of hedgerows. Every nerve was alert. His loader's hands hovered over the shells, the aimer's eye was locked on the road, and Hale's finger rested on the trigger. The rhythm of 3 seconds had become almost tactile, a pulse that steadied fear, focused the mind. At 1943, the rumble began. The earth trembled faintly at first, then grew louder. 4 panzers moving in loose formation, treads grinding mud, steel groaning over uneven ground. The first tank emerged around a bend, turret rotating slowly, machine gun at the ready. Hale gave the word, barely audible. Fire. The gun recoiled violently, sending smoke and heat into the mist. The shell struck the side of the lead panzer. A small explosion, a metal scream, and the tank jolted violently before tipping slightly to the side, immobilized. The loader rammed the next shell into the breach. 1, 2, fire. Another shot. Another strike. The second tank's track shattered, throwing dust and debris into the air. Chaos had begun, but the crew did not falter. 3 seconds remained their constant measure. Hale's eyes flicked from target to target. Each panzer crew attempted to locate the source of the fire, swinging turrets, scanning hedgerows. Yet before they could react fully, the third shot fired at the nearest tank, piercing its side armor. Flames erupted from the engine compartment. The German crews panicked, their drills useless against this measured cadence. Smoke obscured vision, and their confidence crumbled in the span of 12 seconds. Meanwhile, the other 2 tanks hesitated. Panther and Panzer IVs, trained to attack aggressively, were now constrained by surprise and timing. Hale's crew, perfectly synchronized, exploited the mechanical limitations of each vehicle. Panther turrets rotated at their slowest under irregular terrain. The Panzer IVs overcompensated for recoil, leaving openings. Every shot was calculated, each impact a controlled act of destruction rather than random chaos. Ammunition shifted smoothly from the stack to the breech. The loader's arms moved in perfect sync with the gunner's eye. The spotter called ranges and distances without raising his wee voice. The rhythm of 3 seconds was no longer a technique. It was a lifeline. One misstep, 1 second too late, could mean death. Yet for Hale and his crew, The seconds were their allies, guiding movement, fire, and focus. By 1946, 2 tanks were ablaze, one immobilized, and only a single panzer retained partial mobility. The remaining tank attempted to maneuver out of the kill zone, but Hale anticipated it. The gun pivoted, sight locked. 3 seconds. Fire. Another track shredded. The vehicle rolled to the side, engine spewing black smoke. Silence fell, punctuated only by the hiss of cooling metal and the distant sounds of retreating German infantry. From a tactical standpoint, the engagement was flawless. Hale had exploited range, angle, enemy reaction time, and terrain. The lane had become a kill zone, perfectly calculated to restrict enemy maneuvering. Each hedgerow provided cover. Each bend in the road guided the tanks into his line of sight. Technology, human discipline, and battlefield observation converged. One small gun had neutralized an entire platoon of formidable armor, all without a single casualty among Hale's crew. Psychologically, the effect was instantaneous. German tankers, trained for aggression, were stunned. Radio transmissions betrayed confusion. Reports of multiple guns and unknown positions flooded the unit commander's channels. Officers demanded reconnaissance, unsure of where the attack had originated. For men inside steel behemoths, trapped by smoke, debris, and a relentless firing rhythm, fear became paralysis. Hale did not celebrate. He checked the sight lines, scanning for movement, counting silently. 3 seconds. Another shell slid into the breach. His men moved in a quiet, deadly ballet. The lane, now filled with debris and burning metal, still held the potential for danger. German infantry could emerge from side paths, support in. Vehicles could approach from the rear. Discipline remained paramount. At 1949, a small group of enemy infantry attempted to advance toward the gun. Hale's spotter alerted him instantly. He pivoted the gun, calculated range, and fired another shell. The timing was precise, 3 seconds from recognition to action. The soldiers were pinned down behind a collapsed wall, unable to support any armored advance. The combination of firepower and rhythm had created a temporary, yet decisive, dominance of the battlefield. The engagement lasted under 10 minutes from first sighting to total neutralization. 4 panzers were destroyed or immobilized. Enemy infantry scattered or pinned. Hale's crew emerged untouched. The surrounding terrain, previously fraught with danger, was now a tableau of controlled chaos. Smoking tanks, twisted metal, and dust hanging in the fading light. This moment underscored the human-machine interface in warfare. A single disciplined crew, operating in perfect rhythm, had overcome technological superiority through observation, timing, and cohesion. The Panzer Platoon, arguably the most feared combination of armor and coordination on the Western Front, had been rendered ineffective by a combination of human discipline and a modest anti-tank gun. Historians later noted that the engagement illustrated a recurring principle in Normandy. In confined terrain, small units with tactical precision could neutralize armor otherwise considered unstoppable. The 3-second rule became emblematic of this principle, a literal measure of time dictating the fate of men and machines. It was not technology alone, nor courage alone, but the deliberate synchronization of both. As Hale's crew stood silently, reloading and scanning, the sun dipped behind distant trees. Shadows stretched across the hedgerows, mingling with smoke and dust. The lane, once a potential death trap, was now under their control. For a few minutes, time itself seemed to obey their rhythm, each 3-second interval reinforcing survival and dominance. The battle, while brief, left a permanent mark on everyone involved. German survivors would later describe the engagement as uncanny, a single gun destroying an entire platoon before they could even fire a coordinated volley. For the Allies, the lesson was clear. Discipline, timing, and understanding the human element could level the playing field against even the most formidable enemy. And for Hale, it was a confirmation of something he had intuited long before, that in the chaos of war, mastery over seconds could determine life or death. As the last tank shuddered to a halt, Hale's crew held their positions, eyes scanning the smoke-choked lane. The fires from the destroyed Panzer Platoon illuminated the hedgerows in flickering orange. Every man knew the danger was far from over. German forces were highly disciplined. A single gun could be surrounded if support units reacted quickly. But the timing, training, and discipline of Hale's team had bought them a fleeting yet critical advantage. At 1952, the first signs of reaction arrived. From a nearby rise, German scouts peered cautiously at the wreckage. Tank commanders radioed frantic reports, struggling to comprehend how an entire platoon had been neutralized in minutes. Confusion spread through the command chain. Orders were delayed, instructions miscommunicated, and hesitation dominated the battlefield. Hale had exploited not just mechanical weaknesses, but the psychological fracture that arises when an opponent loses control over time and space. The crew continued their methodical rhythm. Another shell loaded, another fired, each interval measured, each shot reinforcing dominance. Any remaining panzer attempting movement was immediately halted. Smoke and dust hid precise targeting points, yet the crew's practiced coordination ensured they did not waste a single round. 3 seconds remained their constant measure, a metronome of lethal precision. By 1955, German infantry attempted to advance from the flanks, hoping to reach the immobilized tanks and reclaim lost ground. Hale's spotter shouted distances, calculating angles rapidly. 2 more shells, timed with unerring accuracy, pinned the troops behind hedgerows, forcing them to retreat under the threat of a renewed volley. Every motion, every decision, was synchronized to maintain the rhythm that had dictated the entire engagement. The hedgerows themselves became weapons. Craters, debris, and twisted metal created natural obstacles. German tanks that had survived the initial salvo now found the terrain impassable. They attempted to reposition, only to discover the calculated layout of the kill zone left them exposed from angles they had not anticipated. Hale's prior observation had accounted for every curve of the lane, every cover available to the enemy. It was a masterclass in terrain exploitation under fire. For the crew, this was not an act of heroism, but of calculation. Each man performed his role with silent precision. The gunner adjusted the sight for recoil and heat expansion. The loader moved shells seamlessly. The spotter called distances without raising his voice. The rhythm of 3 seconds became almost a separate entity, a force guiding their survival. In a battlefield dominated by tanks, artillery, and chaos, discipline became the most effective weapon. By 2012, the engagement had effectively ended. 4 panzers were destroyed or immobilized. Enemy infantry had fallen back or been pinned. The lane was littered with wreckage, smoke curling in the fading light. Hale's crew had not suffered a single casualty. The aftermath was immediate and profound. German morale was shattered, confusion reigned, and tactical momentum shifted to the Allies in this sector. The wider battlefield felt the ripples. Nearby Allied units, previously pinned by German armor, advanced cautiously after receiving visual confirmation of the engagement's outcome. Reports later documented that the psychological effect on the enemy was as significant as the physical destruction. The German command underestimated the threat posed by small, disciplined crews operating under precise timing. Officers later cited this engagement as an example of how isolated anti-tank positions could halt or delay armored advances in ways superior firepower alone could not. Hale's own observations were clinical. He noted smoke patterns, the angles of wrecked vehicles, and remaining threats. Despite the chaos, he recorded details mentally, planning the next potential ambush or withdrawal. Tactical awareness extended beyond firing. Survival required foresight, knowing when to hold position, when to reload, and when to relocate to avoid counterattack. Every decision remained anchored in rhythm, proving that timing dictated both immediate survival and strategic advantage. The German response unfolded slowly. Reconnaissance units were dispatched, artillery called in, but their effectiveness was limited by the confusion of rapid losses and blocked terrain. The destroyed tanks themselves became obstacles, preventing reinforcements from quickly reaching the kill zone. Hale's disciplined crew had turned a fleeting opportunity into an operational advantage. In essence, 4 tanks had become both a threat eliminated and a barrier reinforcing their tactical position. Amid the smoke, Hale's crew performed a quick assessment. The gun barrel remained intact, the breech unjammed, the shells sufficient for further engagement if necessary. Soldiers from adjacent units cautiously approached to assist or consolidate. The rhythm of 3 seconds, once a concept, had proven to be a tangible force on the battlefield. It was a demonstration that even the most heavily armored units could be neutralized through discipline, timing, and careful calculation. The psychological imprint on the Germans was lasting. Field reports describe crews hesitating for minutes after the encounter, questioning whether more anti-tank positions awaited unseen. Fear, uncertainty, and disrupted communication compounded the material losses. Commanders were forced to reconsider their tactics in the bocage, understanding that armor dominance could be undermined by precisely executed small unit action. The engagement also highlighted the human element of modern mechanized warfare. Technology alone could not dictate outcomes. Understanding human response times, stress under fire, and coordinated execution proved decisive. Hale's observation that a tank takes roughly 3 seconds to react became a battlefield principle, though never formally codified. It demonstrated that human observation and disciplined timing could outperform raw firepower, even in technologically superior forces. By 2015, the battlefield had quieted. Fires continued to burn. Smoke drifted along hedgerows, and the lane was effectively under Allied control. Hale's crew took a brief moment to assess ammunition and status, preparing for the possibility of secondary engagement. Their rhythm, the pulse of 3 seconds, had saved them and allowed them to dominate a situation that minutes earlier seemed lethal. Historians later noted the broader implications. The engagement illustrated that small crews, operating with precision and exploiting mechanical and human limitations of armored units, could significantly influence local battle outcomes. The 3-second rule became a testament to the intersection of psychology, timing, and technology, a tactical lesson with operational ramifications far beyond a single lane in Normandy. The sun had fully set by 2030. Villers-Bocage was quiet, except for the crackle of distant fires and the occasional moan of damaged vehicles. Hale's crew, still alert, had proven the lethal potential of discipline under fire. The engagement would be remembered not just for the destruction of a Panzer Platoon, but for the demonstration of how seconds, measured calculated, and executed, could alter the course of an encounter. In that twilight, one rhythm had determined life or death. One rule, 3 seconds, had turned the tide in a localized battlefield, proving that even amidst industrialized warfare, human observation and coordination remained decisive. And as the crew prepared to withdraw or reposition, they carried with them a lesson etched into mud, smoke, and steel. Mastery over time, even measured in seconds, could become the most lethal weapon of all. The immediate aftermath of the engagement at Villers-Bocage was as striking as the battle itself. 4 German tanks destroyed or immobilized, enemy infantry disrupted, and the narrow lane under Allied control, yet the significance extended far beyond the physical destruction. Reports reaching U.S. command highlighted the unusual efficiency of Hale's crew. The 30th Infantry Division logged the action as a textbook execution of rapid, coordinated anti-tank fire, noting that the destruction of a Panzer Platoon without a single Allied casualty was exceptionally rare. Field officers on nearby fronts took notice. Small, well-trained anti-tank teams could achieve outsized effects against armored units, provided that timing, positioning, and terrain were optimized. The engagement challenged prevailing assumptions about armor superiority. German panzer units, even highly experienced, could be neutralized by disciplined, synchronized fire. It was not only a tactical victory, but also an instructional moment, demonstrating how human coordination could override mechanized advantage. German survivors recounted the chaos. Tank commanders admitted in reports that the sequence of fire was unnervingly precise. One officer, later captured, remarked that the interval between shots, almost imperceptible yet consistent, prevented effective return fire. Crews were disoriented, unsure of whether multiple guns were operating or if their own reactions had been delayed. The combination of surprise, speed, and rhythm caused hesitation that proved decisive. Allied soldiers on adjacent lanes observed the result with astonishment. The once feared Panzer Platoon lay incapacitated in a short span of minutes. Debris, smoke, and burning vehicles marked the kill zone, a testament to how tactical discipline could manipulate battlefield dynamics. The psychological effect extended beyond the destroyed tanks. Infantry units advancing nearby reported a boost in confidence, now willing to move through previously contested sectors, knowing that skilled anti-tank teams could neutralize German armor with precision. Reports and after-action assessments emphasized the interplay of human and technological factors. The 57, though light and less powerful than German counterparts, proved lethal in controlled hands. Observers highlighted that raw firepower alone could not account for the outcome. The success hinged on rhythm, timing, and crew cohesion. Hale's method, measured in 3-second intervals, became a point of study for officers seeking to replicate similar results elsewhere. Field manuals were updated to stress the importance of coordination, reaction timing, and predictable sequences in small-unit anti-tank warfare. Beyond the immediate tactical lessons, the engagement had operational implications. German panzer commanders began exercising increased caution in bocage regions, avoiding narrow lanes and hedgerow corridors without prior reconnaissance. Artillery and air support were called upon more frequently to suppress suspected anti-tank positions, slowing armored advances. In essence, one small gun crew had forced adjustments to enemy doctrine, a ripple effect from a single disciplined engagement. For Hale's crew personally, the aftermath was sobering. While physically unharmed, the mental and emotional toll of executing such precise destruction was heavy. Each shell fired had been a calculated act of killing. Each 3-second interval had dictated life or death not just for them, but for enemy crews. Soldiers in interviews years later recalled the tension, the singular focus, and the strange calm induced by the rhythm. The 3-second heartbeat had carried them through terror, and the consequences of its success remained palpable long after the smoke cleared. The incident also influenced Allied training programs. Anti-tank crews were instructed to practice reload and fire sequences under stress, emphasizing consistency, speed, and control over panic. Drill sequences were timed to simulate enemy response intervals, reflecting lessons learned from Hale's engagement. While the exact 3-second rule was unique, the principle that timing, coordination, and rhythm could multiply combat effectiveness became integrated into doctrine. Commanders recognized that even modest weapons could become decisive if human factors were maximized. In reports compiled for divisional headquarters, the engagement was noted for its efficiency, precision, and psychological impact. German observers, captured or interviewed later, cited it as a case of unexpected lethality from a small team. Allies analyzed the sequence: first shot to disrupt, second shot to disable, third to finalize. The measured intervals, adapted to enemy reaction times, became a conceptual model illustrating how anticipation and rhythm could amplify firepower. The broader lesson extended to the Allied advance. Normandy's hedgerows and narrow lanes were no longer seen solely as obstacles, but as opportunities. Proper positioning and timing could transform terrain into a force multiplier. Units applied the principles of the Villers-Bocage engagement elsewhere. Reconnaissance focused on identifying kill zones, crews drilled for coordinated fire, and movement through narrow corridors incorporated intervals to maximize survival. For German forces, the psychological blow lingered. Commanders reported hesitancy in subsequent operations, often overcompensating for fear of unseen anti-tank positions. Tank crews became more cautious, slower to advance, and more reliant on reconnaissance. Even minor deviations from their doctrine risked exposure to disciplined Allied gunners. The engagement had demonstrated that armored superiority was conditional, and that calculated human intervention could negate it in moments. Ultimately, the first phase of the aftermath underscored a dual truth. Small unit innovation could achieve strategic influence, and disciplined human coordination could overcome technological disparity. Hale's crew, operating under the rhythm of 3 seconds, had not only destroyed a platoon of formidable tanks, but had created a lasting impression on both sides of the front. The success was measured in vehicles lost, enemy hesitation, and the lessons transmitted through reports and training, all of which extended far beyond the muddy lane in Normandy. The impact of the Villers-Bocage engagement resonated beyond the immediate battlefield. Reports from U.S. divisional headquarters noted that the destruction of an entire Panzer Platoon by a single disciplined crew was unprecedented in Normandy. Analysts recognized that the engagement highlighted a critical principle of modern warfare. Disciplined, coordinated action could multiply the effectiveness of modest weaponry, sometimes surpassing raw technological superiority. The psychological and operational consequences became key points of study for both Allied and German commands. For Allied forces, the engagement served as a blueprint. Field manuals emphasized coordination under fire, rapid reloading, and measured firing intervals. Training exercises were adapted to simulate enemy reaction times, teaching crews to anticipate, respond, and maintain rhythm even under extreme stress. The 3-second rule, while unique to Hale's crew, inspired a broader appreciation for timing as a tactical force multiplier. Small teams could now be seen as potential decisive agents, capable of shaping armored encounters far beyond their numerical or technological capacity. Morale among Allied infantry and armored units also increased. Units operating nearby observed the effects of the engagement. German tanks immobilized, crews disoriented, and infantry suppressed without Allied casualties. Soldiers reported renewed confidence moving through hedgerows and narrow lanes. The demonstration that timing and precision could overcome formidable armor reinforced discipline and initiative at the squad and platoon levels. For men often facing the terrifying bulk of German panzers, it was a rare example of control within chaos. On the German side, the engagement sowed uncertainty. Reports from panzer units highlighted hesitation in subsequent operations. Commanders became wary of narrow lanes and hedgerow approaches, increasingly calling for reconnaissance and caution before committing armor. Panther and Panzer IV units, previously relied upon to dominate terrain through mobility and firepower, were forced to adapt. The psychological effect of the engagement lingered. The fear of unseen anti-tank positions slowed advances, disrupted coordination, and exposed units to additional vulnerability. Long-term doctrinal effects were equally significant. Allied anti-tank tactics began to formalize principles observed at Villers-Bocage: precision, anticipation, and human rhythm. The understanding that enemy reaction times could be exploited influenced the deployment of guns, the selection of firing positions, and even the coordination between infantry and armor. Where once heavy firepower was the default approach, calculated discipline and anticipation became valued as equally decisive. Officers incorporated lessons from Hale's engagement into training manuals, highlighting the role of observation, timing, and psychological pressure in anti-tank warfare. The campaign in Normandy itself reflected the wider consequences. As Allied forces pressed inland, German armor encountered increasing resistance not solely from superior numbers, but from disciplined small-unit tactics. Anti-tank crews, trained in rhythm and timing, replicated the principles of the 3-second rule to varying degrees of success. German armored units found themselves delayed, forced to expend resources on reconnaissance, and compelled to adapt maneuvers to avoid predictable vulnerabilities. Every narrow lane and hedgerow became a potential death trap, extending the operational impact of small engagements like Villers-Bocage across the entire front. For Hale's crew personally, the aftermath was a mixture of relief and solemnity. The destruction they had wrought was immediate and total, yet the human cost, even if not among their own, weighed heavily. Witnessing armored men trapped and destroyed, knowing the precision of their actions determined survival or death, left an enduring impression. In interviews decades later, crew members described the strange clarity induced by the 3-second rhythm. A focus so intense it excluded fear, but left memory intact. The rule had been a lifeline, a mechanical heartbeat guiding them through lethal chaos. Allied intelligence analysts later studied the engagement in detail. Reconstructions of the firing sequence, terrain mapping, and enemy reactions confirmed the interplay of technology, psychology, and timing. They noted that while the 57mm gun was modest in power, its effectiveness increased exponentially under disciplined use. Observers highlighted that tactical genius often lay not in inventing new weapons, but in understanding the human-machine interface, exploiting enemy vulnerabilities, and applying rhythm and coordination to achieve disproportionate outcomes. The German perspective reinforced these lessons. Captured officers admitted surprise at the speed and precision of the engagement. Post-battle evaluations acknowledged that even elite panzer crews could be undone by a single, well-positioned and coordinated anti-tank team. The perception of invincibility associated with armored units was challenged. Tactics evolved, but the psychological imprint of Villers-Bocage lingered. influencing German hesitation in subsequent hedgerow encounters. Ultimately, the long-term aftermath of Hale's engagement was a convergence of lessons. Discipline, timing, and anticipation could transform small units into decisive agents. Psychological disruption could amplify tactical impact, and terrain, observation, and rhythm were as lethal as technological superiority. The 3-second rule, Bekomniter, born of necessity and honed in mud and fear, became a symbol of how human skill could impose order on chaos, shaping outcomes beyond what firepower alone could achieve. In the broader context of the Normandy campaign, the engagement demonstrated that mastery of timing and coordination could shift local engagements decisively, influencing operations, morale, and doctrine. It was a moment where seconds, counted with precision, dictated the fate of machines, men, and territory, a testament to the enduring power of discipline under fire. And as the battlefield quieted, the lesson was clear. In war, every second mattered, and mastery over those seconds could determine not just survival, but victory itself. War often measures itself in tanks destroyed, miles gained, or lives lost. Yet, at Villers-Bocage, the difference came not from numbers or firepower, but from rhythm, timing, and human discipline. Sergeant Thomas Hale and his crew demonstrated that in the chaos of battle, seconds could carry as much weight as tons of steel. The 3-second rule was more than a tactic. It was a manifestation of focus under pressure, of cohesion under fear, and of human precision harnessed against technological might. The engagement illuminates a broader truth about warfare. Machines, no matter how advanced, are only as effective as those who operate them. Human observation, anticipation, and coordinated action can amplify modest weapons into instruments of decisive power. In Normandy, where terrain restricted visibility and movement, these qualities proved decisive. A single gun, operated by a disciplined team, could reshape a battle, alter enemy perception, and ripple through strategy far beyond its immediate kill zone. There is also a lesson in the psychology of survival. Fear, stress, and confusion are constants on the battlefield, yet Hale's crew turned those forces into tools. By counting seconds, maintaining rhythm, and trusting each other implicitly, they created clarity amidst chaos. The rhythm itself became a lifeline, a heartbeat guiding men through fire, smoke, and steel. It was a human solution to a mechanized problem, a demonstration that courage and precision could coexist with discipline and calculation. Historically, the engagement underscores the enduring interplay between human ingenuity and technological warfare. It reminds us that the effectiveness of weapons is inseparable from the skill, timing, and cohesion of those who wield them. Villers-Bocage stands as a testament to the impact of small units operating with mastery over moments, a principle as relevant in the study of history as it is in the understanding of human potential under pressure. In the end, the 3-second rule is more than a wartime anecdote. It is a lesson that in the crucible of combat, seconds can decide life and death, precision can overcome power, and discipline can turn fear into triumph. And in those fleeting moments, the human spirit, measured in beats and breaths, can leave a mark as enduring as any monument of war.